that will hopefully change the tourist experience at different sites in the region. And for us in Lebanon, there are 3 sites that we will introduce you to. And these are the focus of our games and the games that we will hope some of you will be interested in developing. And there are 2 types of games also we will discuss. We call them the analog and the digital, or physical and the virtual games. Who are the partners and who's involved in this project? Um, there are 7 partners from 4 countries. Lebanon is the lead, and the lead person on the project at AUB, which is the lead organization, is Dr. Daniel Asmar. He's with us today attending. And also I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Eli Shammas, is from mechanical engineering. He's our designer, the in-house designer. Also, Samir, you heard me talk to him at the beginning. He'll come in and present later on during our presentation. Mr. Samir Shaker is our lead senior developer. So he's the techie guy. And also you heard me talk to Ms. Sabah. So Dana is our administrative lead. So she's the actual boss here. And I see some other partners coming in. Also, I saw some names. I saw Lian, and you heard me talk to Ahmad early on. He's our partner, Ahmad Fuwan. Ahmad is from Jordan. So these are some of the partners that we've listed here on this slide. And AUB and DGA, the Department of General Antiquities, are really leading this effort here at the national level in Lebanon. And you'll hear me mention DGA several times. Few things about the objectives of this initiative, this project. There are 3 things really. Enhance public-private cooperation. And you can see this in the partners and in the mix of the partners. You see some public and some private organizations, some universities, and some technical organizations involved in it. We want to have a public engagement from the private sector, and we want to enhance entrepreneurship through this project. And this is one of the key messages I want you to take today. One of the things that I want to get you excited about are the opportunities that we're pushing for and we are funding through this project, so that you could become partners to us, and you will be able to develop your own games that we will be able to fund through this project, and then you will contribute to the success of this project. So this is why we're having these really webinars. And all of this is revolving around one main thing, which is to increase the tourism flows. Ironically, COVID hits when this project starts, and tourism is one of the big sectors that really got hit. And really that shows now the added importance of what we're doing is to try to excite people about tourism more and change that experience and make it a non-traditional tourist experience that will excite people of all ages to go to these historical sites, from kids up to the elderly. So what we're talking about here, and this comes down to what? It comes down to 40 games. We're looking across the 4 countries to develop 40 games. 10 of them are to be developed in Lebanon, 5 in-house, which means AUB and DGA are leading on those, and I'll introduce you to those initial ideas that we have and we started developing, and 5 external ones, and that's where we're hoping can come in and contribute and propose your own games and develop your own games. And again, I mentioned the analog and the digital component, and this is not a hard line that we're separating, but our requirement is to categorize the games either into analog or digital. But you'll see some of the games that I will discuss actually are a combination. But ultimately, you have to put them somewhere, either analog or digital. It's just the technicality. Samir will really talk a bit about the technicalities of analog and digital later on in the webinar. So MEDGAIMS in Lebanon, I mentioned 3 sites. These are the 3 sites. Salha Castle, the Fidar Tower, and the Saida Sea Castle. 3 very different sites as far as the name recognition is concerned. Some people know them very well, and some they don't know them as well, or they're not as popular. And we're hoping that we really could change the tourism experience in these 3 sites, and potentially in the future that might spill over into other sites in Lebanon that could benefit from these games that we're developing. So I come to the sub-grants discussion, and by the way, at the end, you'll have time to ask any questions that you might have. So I come to the sub-grants and the hackathons and the creative lab, and how are these related to each other. In total, we are having 20 sub-grants. So we want to award 20 sub-grants, 5 in each of the 4 participating countries. So Lebanon will award 5 projects, grants that will go to digital games and to analog games. Those that are categorized as primarily digital will have a budget of 15,000 euros, and those that are under analog type will be awarded up to 10,000 euros. And there's also technical and equipment support that can be provided. And these are all details in the terms of reference that is published, and we'll provide you a link for that if you're interested. There's a lot of details on how do you go on applying and what is the details of the process. But roughly the process starts with you submitting a proposal, and then there will be a hackathon for the digital types of games, and then there'll be creative labs, which are kind of the analog side of the hackathon, is what we call the creative labs. During which you will be able to refine your game ideas. You will be able to work with experts for the historical sites. So it's something to mention that the DGA, that they bring not only their resources and their experience, but also they bring their network of experts in. And we're working with several experts in Lebanon about the sites, about the history, so that when we develop these games that have an educational component, that's very critical, that educational and historical component is actually accurate. So this process is summarized here in this slide. So the terms of reference, the conditions, the process, the criteria of evaluation, the deadlines are all already published. If you go to the website, you can see those. Those were launched back in July. And we have 2 rounds, 2 deadlines. We have one in 15th and one of September, so coming up very soon, and one in the 30th of October. So please keep these deadlines in mind, and please try to target these deadlines. And the selection process, based on these proposals, we would invite the teams that will submit the most creative ideas, most relevant ideas that satisfy the conditions of the POR, to hackathons and creative labs. And for Lebanon, because there's hackathons and creative labs in each of the partner countries, for Lebanon, our round 1 and round 2 selection deadlines are one towards the end of September, one around the mid of November. And we always say inshallah, but we're hopeful that we will be able to make it to these dates if COVID restrictions and social distancing restrictions and restrictions at AUB itself forbid us from having an in-person hackathon and creative lab. We might opt to have this activity be virtual, be remote. And the idea is that you submit the initial proposal, you get selected, shortlisted, you get invited to the hackathon and creative labs, you spend a couple of days refining your idea with your team members and with support from the experts and from us, and eventually you could pitch your idea. That would allow us then, based on that information and based on your proposal, to make a selection to give the awards for the digital and the analog games. And once you're awarded, you have about 8 months to deliver a beta version, and that would be deployed for public testing. And then we would have feedback, and we'll have another 2 months to have the final version delivered. So it's a very tight timeline, a relatively tight timeline from the date that the grant is awarded until when the final delivery is. And we're talking here about the production grade deployed game, be it digital, so we're talking about the quality of coding, the quality of testing, the reliability, or if it's analog, we're talking about the sustainability of whatever is being built or whatever is being designed and fabricated on site. So we need to make sure that the quality is a professional quality by the end of this period when we get that final version of the game deployed. And mind you, this is going to have a lot of visibility. This is going to be an installation on site that is very visible, and we need to make sure that we do a good job there and quality there. So on the digital and analog gamification, on the technical side, Samir, I think, will come in now from his side and talk to you a bit about that and these different types of games. Then I will come back and introduce to you the different games that we have in mind for our 5 games in Lebanon that AUB and DGA are leading on, so that would allow you to get inspired with what type of things we are doing, and that would allow you not to conflict with what we're doing and not to propose something that is very close to what we're doing, and try to do something that is different, that is also interesting but different. So Samir, you wanna come on board here and discuss this? I'll stop sharing from my side.
Hello everyone. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
It's coming up for me.
Please let me know when everybody
Yes.
can see. Yes, you can see a slide.
All right. Yes, I'm seeing the chat.
So all right. So I'm going to be, as Dr. Ahmed decided at the beginning of the presentation, we're looking to mainly kinds of games, digital and analog games, and I'm going to be presenting to you the differences, the pros and cons, whenever you want to evaluate what kind of game you want to do, to have a better perspective from our experience trying to do this kind of games, and as well give you the option to have a mixture of both. Now, a digital game, I'm sure everybody knows what that is. It's basically like the opportunity you have when you're doing something for tourism is that you can interact somewhat with your interval. For example, in one of the games that Dr. Ahmed will show you later, we're using a projection on the site because it's very important, because the goal of the whole project is, of course, to encourage tourism. So whenever you want to do your digital game, it's better to be a game that can only be played on that site because you want to push people to come there. So in terms of technical aspects, when you design for something like that, you have to consider the diversity of devices because you cannot ask your tourists to have a certain kind of device. If you're doing, for example, an augmented reality kind of game, you have to make a market study to see how many people would have these kind of advanced devices on board and stuff like that. And the other thing is that, I'm sure you know that whenever you do an app, it doesn't stay completely functional and operating systems are constantly upgraded. So, if you're going to have to maintain it, you also have to take that consideration that you need to constantly update it. And the other thing is that you also have to consider, does your game need connectivity? Do you need internet? Are you going to have a local Wi-Fi there? All of this has to factor into your cost because you can't expect everybody to have internet. Tourists most often come from different countries. They always have 3G. So this is a thing that you have to take care of when you're talking about digital games. And when we're talking about the analog games, we're talking about games that have a component, a physical component that you can touch. So the most physical kind of analog game would be something like Escape the Room. Be purely analog. But what would we encourage you to do is something with a mixture of both, where you could use maybe a bit of electronics to link the two. And one of the games that Dr. Ahmed will present later, for example, we modeled a catapult. This is just a small prototype, where when you move your catapult, there's a digital component as well that controls that. So it's like basically making your own custom controller, but somehow in the historical context. In this case as well, you have to consider maintenance because this is probably a bit harder to maintain. You need hardware experts, and you cannot expect everybody to be really gentle with the hardware device. So maybe in a few months or in a year, something is going to break and you have to replace it. So all of this has to be taken into consideration when designing your game, because the longer it lasts, the better it will have an impact on the tourism sector. I mean, regardless of how well you design it, maintenance has to be part of the package. It just has to be there. It's Now, completely digital is good, completely analog is good, but if you mix the two, it really makes it a lot more interesting. It's a bit harder to design analog games that are super fun on their own. Always adding something digital would be nice. So the pros and cons of analog games, first of all, they're easy to understand. So let's say if a grandma goes there that never touches any digital device, you need to explain to her all that much. And you don't need to install something when you go there. You don't have to open any kind of app store and try to download a huge kind of package. And it also offers a break from digital life. A lot of people, especially now with the COVID, everybody's looking at their screen all day and just want a break. So that's also an advantage now. I offer a fully analog experience. People want to take that. And it's also completely independent. So you go to the site, you don't need a smartphone or anything like that. And it does have a wow effect if you do it right, because you can have projections, you can have some kind of special kind of equipment that is important on board. Now the cons is that obviously it's easily damaged. It might require on-site actors. Maybe you're going to have some kind of play, you're going to have role-playing, for example, so the costumes, and you would need to hire actors. It's also might be difficult to find them and to fund them as well. It might be difficult to make interesting because, if it's not really in terms of gameplay and story, people might find it boring. It's a bit harder to do that. It costs more. Physical tend to cost more. Digital costs you more in terms of time, and it also requires somebody on site to constantly maintain it. You cannot really maintain it remotely, and you probably need a big design because you need to manufacture all these things. For digital games, it's really easy to create fiction because anything you can imagine, you can draw, you can model, you can constantly iterate and improve upon the game. For the analog one, it costs more stuff. I mean, if you start, for example, in our case, you do the first model of a catapult, then you have to do another one. Each one of them costs a lot of money. So you have to really plan a lot more. In digital games, you can just iterate every week. I'm sure a lot of you know that experience. It does feel innovative, obviously. It's the new technology, and it's hard to damage. But it requires specialized skills, so obviously programming, if you're not a programmer yourself, requires installation to play in theory if you do it in a typical way, and I'm going to present a solution for the next slide, because the tourist has to install some kind of app. If you really want to do a good game, it does need a smart that's fast, so some tourists might be excluded from that. And it does also require maintenance in terms of updating. Now, digital solution, the most popular one is Unity because it's so portable. And it's easier most developers, especially game developers, like using it because it has so many tools, so much support, there's so many free resources out there to use it. It supports pretty much anything, especially for a tour kind of game. You don't need the best ever graphics, it's about the experience. It's easy to learn, a lot of assets for you to use. But one of the major problems, the package you have to install is going to be big. And for like a game that you're supposed to play maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, one thing, a lot of tourists would be like, this is not worth it, I'm not gonna use my code on this maybe, or something like that. And you would also need an app store and a Play Store presence. So if you don't already have a presence there, and you need to submit your app to the store, that would be also an obstacle. And if you don't have a license, you also have this class screen thing. And now one of the solutions I found that are really, really good, it's this JavaScript engine called Babylon.js. It's not very popular in Lebanon, but it's really, really easy to use. It was made by Microsoft employees. It runs completely in the browser. So all you have to do is just give a link to the tourists and you start playing. So the time between them knowing about the game and starting to play is literally seconds. And they're not gonna feel like they're not gonna have to take the decision, do I install this, do I not install this, do I have space on my phone, stuff like that. Now it's not harder for developers because there are no tools for it, it's all coding. It does contain less features, but it does have enough for a typical game, including augmented reality. It is easier to learn if you're a coder. If you're a coder, you're just used to writing everything. It's super, super easy to use. But if you've never coded before and used Unity, just drag and drop, it might take you a month or two to learn it, but maybe not more. Yeah. Now, the other cool thing about Babylon is that because the browser and because these kind of games are going to be on-site, you can update and debug remotely. So the developer would be home testing things, and somebody would be, let's say, inside out, trying the game. And he'd be like, oh, you have to move this a bit to the right, fix better with a bit faster, make this player run a bit faster, or something like that. And the developer, changes something, and the tester just refreshes the browser, and that's it. Iterating and really perfecting the experience of the gameplay becomes much, much better, and you have a much better chance of having a completely refined game. It's not about bells and whistles and graphics, it's about the actual feeling of the player. So yeah, that's the 3 ads for Babylon. Now Babylon is written in TypeScript, which is super typed JavaScript. So it's typically JavaScript with typed. You can still use it with JavaScript, but if your game is a bit like, I do encourage you to start learning TypeScript. If you're learning JavaScript, it's going to take you like a day to learn it. It's super easy, but it does detect bugs a lot earlier. It's going to save you time in terms of development. It's super easy to use. I'm going to show you just a quick example of how easy it is. It does have a playground because it runs in the browser. You can just play around with it in the browser. And you have a lot of examples to test. I'm going to show you a very simple example here. You have the report, and whenever you change something, let's say I'm going to change something like light intensity, you just press play, and you see the change right away on the right. So it's also to learn programming, even because it's almost interactive, it's instantaneous, and you don't have to install any kind of software. You can literally code this on your phone. Yeah. And with that, I give it back to Dr. Ahmad, who's going to introduce the games that we are developing currently.
Thank you, Samir. I'll take back the presentation. I know we've, can you hear me again? Can you see my presentation? I'll wait till I get, yes? Okay, thank you. I know we're presenting a lot of information very quickly. 20, 25 minutes, we dumped on you a lot of things. Let me recap a couple of keywords. Keywords are statements, make the tourist experience more exciting, change the experience, to attract more tourists, to have tourists stay longer, to make it more educational. This is the first key message. The second message is the opportunities. We have called for proposals, 15K euros for digital, 10K euro for analog type of games, and they will be awarding 5 of them. The process is to submit a proposal, then attend the hackathon or a creative lab. And if you're selected, bingo, you're a partner on this project, basically working with us to do this exciting tourist experience. 3 sites, keep them in mind, Msailha, Fidar, and Saida. Okay? So that brings us to the last part of the webinar, which is the internal games. So we'll talk very briefly about our concepts for the 5 internal games, the combination both digital and analog. And I know in some cases, again, that is something that you cannot really distinguish, is this analog or is this digital? And the reason I'm saying this is don't get fixated on this a lot, although we've repeated it a lot and we've said it and we've talked about analog versus digital, but don't get fixated about it a lot. Think about the game and think about what Dr. Asmar calls the wow effect. Come up with a cool game, come up with a wow effect, and then we can figure out the digital or the analog part. So the first one is I want to show, and hopefully my presentation doesn't crash because it has a lot of large videos in it, is what we call the medieval architect. The site of this is planned to be the Msailha Castle, and this is a virtual game, is a digital game, and the concept is simple, is we want the player to reconstruct the castle. So actually the DGA did a 3D reconstruction of the castle using drones. They took images, they did the reconstruction, and they came up with a model that looks like this. Now this is only the rock part. The castle is taken out. If you could see that white part. And the idea is that we develop a game where somebody can come in and will try to rebuild it. We could here work, for example, on the techniques, historical techniques on rebuilding, and try to use these techniques and try to put these pieces together that you see here coming into the model to try to fully rebuild that castle in a digital format, possibly using even some historical digital tools that the experts, again, the content and a lot of this, we will have experts that are available to support you to give you that historical component. Okay? So this is the first concept of the first game. And again, we have this model and we could provide these 3D models if somebody's proposal and somebody's game requires them, we can help you with those assets. The other one is the battle reenactment. This is planned for the Saida Sea Castle. And this is a mix between a physical system and a digital system. And this is what Samir showed you in his presentation, a photo about it. And this is almost like Angry Birds, but the idea is instead of shooting birds, you're shooting some objects out of historical weapons, things like a catapult probably or others. And we would build physically. Let me show you the video here. This is the miniature model of it that you see on the left, and you see the Unity environment on the right. So the players will actually not have a miniature one, will have a very large catapult that we will fabricate, manufacture, and put in the castle outdoors. And they'll be able to manipulate it, and this catapult will be connected digitally, so the wires and the sensors are connected there to a station that is by the catapult outdoors in the castle. And so somebody would be able to move it, and the other person, as we will see here in the video, will be able to see digitally the model move accordingly. So as if the big catapult becomes a big joystick that is moving this digital model, and this person is seeing this augmented environment where they can start shooting these ships that are incoming, and trying to do that faster, try to shoot more objects within a certain time. So these are the playability factors that we still need to think about. And clearly we need to think about the historical educational content that we might add here, information to tell them something about these weapons and something about the ships that are attacking, and so on. So that component is missing here, but this gives you an idea of, again, another part of this initiative and the type of games that you could think about. So we're now in the phase of designing the right weapon for that particular era that should go in the Saida Sea Castle, and what type of weapons they used to use at the time we're in that phase, in that discussion. The other third game is meant for Msailha, and here also it's one of those large type of installations. Just like the catapult one will be a bit large, this is also meant to be a bit large, and the players would be sitting there digitally solving a puzzle. And this is the video that is crashing for me sometimes, so I'll hopefully jump ahead and try not to have it crash. So they would be able to play in it a game where they're connecting. Can you still hear me? Because I'm seeing that this video is locking.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, unfortunately this... okay, just 1 second. We will blame Dan for this, because it's his video. Can you still see my screen? Because I want to show you parts of this. And the idea here is, let's try to play it outside the presentation. Okay, so the idea, I'll skip a bit the introduction. Some of these videos, we did them for bit of more promotional setup, I would say, and then I'll jump ahead. The idea here is that the players will play a game like connecting water pipes, so this, in the objective of operating an old mill. Actually, Msalha had in it an old mill at the bottom, it turns out. So they would be able to play a game, get the water running. So this is the game. I'm going to go back, and this is the game here. They would play something like this, and if they're successful, then the actual, and this is a miniature model, clearly, but eventually we want to build actual mill with water turning, water running in it, and the actual physical mill would be turning. So this, in this case, the digital is controlling the analog, whereas in the catapult one, the analog was controlling the digital. So there we move the catapult and the model move. In this case, we move the digital, and if you're successful, the analog would start moving. And again, this is 3D printed miniature model, but we're hoping that we could scale this up to a mill of that is relatively impressive in size and is large in size. So I'll stop this video and go back to the presentation. So we still have a couple of games to talk about. Once we have this up and running, I'll tell you about them. So one of them is the time machine. Okay, sorry about that. So we talked about the internal games, the medieval architect who's building a 3D model, the battle reenactment with the catapult, the Crusader, Robinson Crusader, who's running the water network in order to run the mill, and we come to the time machine. The time machine is designed for FIDAR power, and the idea is that we will have a motion capture system indoors in one of the rooms, and players would come in and interact both with the motion capture system and they will be able to interact with the projection. This way they could play several games. This is meant to have multiple mini games in it, and kind of like a medieval Olympics game. And this is one of the introductory videos. I'll skip the early parts of how does it start and how do you interact with it. There's an instructional phase at the beginning. This is being showed on the projector to tell you how to play it, because again, you're controlling the digital with the gestures. So the player comes in, chooses the language, gets an introduction about it, and then they'll be able to control the game with motions and gestures physically to control whatever game they decide to choose from this multiple sets of mini games. And this is a part of the video. I'll jump forward and show you this. This is a part of the video showing the player up in the upper right corner and showing the game control at the bottom. So you got shot at, and then you're protecting yourself, you're shielding yourself, and you're moving, you're doing certain gestures, and then eventually you reach the target and accomplish a certain target. In this case, you're going to light this target here, and you got the flame to it, and this is the same concept, but another mini game is with archery. So you would be shooting out of, now we're thinking here that maybe you're shooting in the room, or maybe you could do this augmented and be actually shooting out of an opening that exists currently in the FIDAR tower. So there are these still design options that we're working with, but this again gives you an idea how this motion capture would work in order to control all these different games. And this is the last one that is something similar to the first one and shows you how the motion works and how the lighting of the flame occurs. So again, there's a lot of potential for this. Do we, when thinking about rendering this information, do you put screens around? Do you put a projector? Do you make this multiple player game? Do you make it single player? Do you make them competitive? Do you make it cooperative? So there's a lot of questions still need to be figured out around not only this game, but even all the others. The Conqueror is another one that is meant for possibly two sites. We will do this, the Msalha and the castle and the Saida Sea castle. This is an augmented reality game, would be played indoor, outdoor, and the idea that there'll be a storyline around it, again, not finalized yet from our side, but something like a Pokemon almost, that you would go and collect digital 3D models of historical items that are in the environment to solve a certain puzzle. So the Conqueror game, I'll exit and I'll show the video this way just to make sure that it doesn't crash again. So this is a bit of a long video. I won't show the whole thing. I'll jump forward to show you the idea behind it. And again, the historical relevance, the educational component is very important, but we, in this case, there's a lot of attention also to the storytelling component. What are you telling? What message you're telling? What are you explaining to the players? And this clearly has to do with your age group target. What are the historical messages that you want to relay? Possibly what can you excite them about the site more? How could you excite them about the community? Could you think about linking your games to something that has an impact on the local community? Can you link sites together? I'm throwing out ideas and things that we've thought about when we come up with these games, and would be good for you to think about when you are proposing your games also. This is showing some of the content and some of the storyline behind this game. Again, it's an augmented reality, object collection, puzzle solving type of game. So I want to conclude again, but by saying that there's a lot of potential, and we know that there's a lot of creativity out there that we are hoping we could tap into, to also think about cases where can we help on the entrepreneurship side with this initiative? Can we come up with something that maybe after the project could become sustainable in itself? Can we involve the local community in some of these games where you might have to have somebody present in the castle for that game to work? I know that is challenging, but maybe we can hire somebody that could be there, and maybe the game eventually could become self-sustained after the project conclusion, and we can have discussions if you want to go that route. I'm just trying to make these statements to expand the scope and tell you that there's almost no limit on what type of game that you might think about, and what is the scope, and how you could factor in some of the entrepreneurship and some of the social aspect and some of the community aspects and the neighborhood aspect to all of these sites. These are something that are very important for us in this project. And also, how do you bring in the tourism industry? So tour operators, hotels, restaurants, I don't know, you might be creative to come up with a game that maybe brings some of these components into the playability of the game, and maybe showcases them, or also highlights their presence in the neighborhood. Again, these are just ideas that we're throwing out. We were not very successful in our games bringing these dimensions in, but we're hoping that you could add more creativity and add more excitement. And this is the slogan that we came up with. We're game, are you? And this is the last slide that shows you the link to go to look at the terms of reference and the requirements for the submissions. They're not too complicated. I suggest you start quick because the deadlines are coming up very quickly. And by the way, if you submit the first time and you're not successful, you could take it back and submit again in the second round. And please follow us, like us, tag us on social media. And I'll stop here and open the floor to any questions, discussions. Dan, Eli, Liane, I even see Maria Giovanna, our partner also. Hi, Maria. If anybody has any questions to Samir, any of the partners, please, the floor is yours.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, marhaba. Okay, I have two questions, if I can phrase them very shortly.
Sure.
One is the target audience. Are these supposed to be for tourists that are already in the country, or are we talking about inspiring tourists, people who are interested in Lebanon but are not quite sure? Or are we talking about making an experience that is like a companion app of sorts for tourists? So I just want to know more about the target audience itself.
Sure. And you have another question?
Oh yeah, the other question is when you say analog, which means physical, does that also count board games and card games, or is it specifically to tech-oriented products? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, wonderful questions, because I forgot to say these, and these are very important. I'll start with the second one. The analog, anything goes. Board games, more than welcome. Any sports games, we even have thought of sports types of games. So completely analog, no batteries, nothing, no electricity involved, more than welcome and actually encouraged. So please, if you have any ideas there, we'd love to discuss them. On the target audience, also super question. So it's open, it's up to you, depends on the scope of the game. From our perspective, the bigger the impact, the better. And really, we want to attract tourists to the sites, especially the less known ones. Very few people, for example, know what FIDAR is. So whether they're local or international, I would say both. But if you feel in some cases that it will impact the design and you want to focus it on one community more than the other, it's your call there. The impact is one of the criteria that we look at. So the broader the impact, the better. But we realize now that international tourists, given COVID, is going to be limited for the time being. So you don't necessarily have to take that target. And also, I take this opportunity to mention that it'd be great if your game also can showcase the other sites that are within our scope or even outside our scope. So if you are able to develop a game that will excite people to visit all the sites in the south of Lebanon or in the north of Lebanon or somewhere else, that'd be great. But for us, the focus is on these three sites, and we'd like your game to at least be relevant to one of these sites. But you're welcome to make it even broader and more relevant. Other questions? Any other comments? Leo. Leo is asking about the IP. George, sorry, I'm just noticing there are some questions in the chat. I just noticed them. I hope I didn't miss any before. So first there's a comment from, the name is not the real name, I'm not sure who is saying, you can also sell the model as a kit for visitors. I think you're talking about the catapult. Yes, we've thought about that, where the game might generate objects that you might sell or give. The selling, there might be restrictions in the initial phase of the project, but maybe later on for sustainability, you might consider either giving away or selling. Will a recording of this workshop be shared? Yes, I hope so. I think it's being recorded and it will be shared. Does the creator keep the game IP? Maria Giovanna had the same question come out for her in her webinar, and I'll let maybe Dan jump in and help us with that question on the IP. I think we've had a lot of discussions on that.
Hello, everybody. Dani and Asma. Welcome, and I'm very happy that all of you are joining us. And thank you, Imad and Samir, for this great webinar. Very informational. With regards to IP, If you are developing a game from scratch for this hackathon or for this proposal, the IP remains the ownership of the DGA and the AUB. If you are using previous technology that's available, let's say in your company, or is available online, or something that was used to establish this game, that previous IP remains yours, but you give us we have the freedom to use that free of charge for the game that is played at our site. And this only makes sense since we're funding this, and we want to still be able to use the game after the hackathon is over, after you're done. Now, there are some caveats to that helps you guys as well. If at the end of this game you decide to develop the same game at different sites, you have the right to do so. So we do not take away that, even though the IP is ours for that particular game at that particular site. If you decide to develop the same game at different sites, you have the right to do so. We will not forbid you doing that. Another thing, if you decide to develop further that game, the part that you develop for our game remains ours, but the additional part or the new game, the new compilation of the game, the IP of that becomes yours. I know it's complicated, and we'll elaborate a lot more on that in the hackathons, but we had to maintain the IP rights for ourselves in the sense of maintaining our ability to play the games post the end of the project, which is in 2022. Hope that clarifies things a little bit. I wanted to also answer the previous question about who the target audience should be. Lebanon is in all Mediterranean partners or international countries, and we love to have tourists from all over the place. So it is true that you can design your game to be playable for the Lebanese audience or international audience, but keep in mind that people that are visiting, if it has jokes or things that are internal to Lebanon, and international tourists are not going to understand it, it's going to really kill a little bit of the experience. So first thing, you want to make sure that the languages, if you want to include Arabic and French, you want to include English as well, you want to include the 3 languages for people or visitors who are international visitors to be able to play those games as well. We'll talk a lot about that also in the hackathons in terms of cultural sensitivity, religions, and things you should be addressing and not addressing. But the target audience, I would say, international community first, Lebanese also on a second, well, not really second, I would say equally, but the international community should be addressed for sure. Hope that answers both your questions.
So Dan, on the IP, effectively what we're saying, guys, is that we can have free use of your IP in these sites, and in a way you maintain your IP for any other sites or any further developments in the future. And our use is a non-profit use. So we will not take it and go use it for a commercial purpose, but we want to make sure, and the EU funding organization wants to make sure that once the project is over, we would not turn around and somebody would lock us and say, "This, you cannot use it there." So we have the right of use, but you would maintain your IP beyond that. I hope that clarifies. Many good questions I'm seeing here also. I'll read some of them. Muhammad, hi Muhammad Dawi. Should the game work on site only? Also great question, you guys. We're forgetting to mention these important points. No, but it has to work on site. So what I mean is there has to be an on-site component for it that would attract you to come and play on site. So if you want to play the trick of somebody downloads an app, and we're thinking about that, for example, in the Catapult game, they would have an app, they could play it at home, they shoot boats, and it's limited. And then once they come on site, they could do something more with the actual physical one. So as long as you have that link to the site and you are able to bring them to the site and there's something special in the site for that game, then that's okay. It'd be great if they could play parts off and parts on site. Iyad is asking for digital games that people required to make use the engines mentioned. It means Babylon or Unity, or can they use the technology? No. This was just an added information from Samir. We'd like to put that a bit out of our experience for those that have a 3D component, but absolutely not. The design, the technical aspects, anything goes as far as technology is concerned. No restrictions, no limitations there, except, again, the sustainability. You would not want to use a piece of software that requires licensing or cost that will kill the game post the project. So that's something to think about. Malik is saying, does the idea need to serve a historical purpose only? It can be, for example, a small fun fact about this place. A fun fact about the place is a historical purpose. So to us, yes, that's fine. As long as there's some educational component, small fun facts, a story, anything of that sort, that is fine. But you don't want them to come there and play a game that has nothing to do with the site. And the DGA particularly is very keen on making sure that we have some educational component and the game in a way has some serious aspect to it and not just some random game that has nothing to do with the site itself.
If I may, Imad, just...
Yes, please jump in on ED or anybody wants to jump in. Maria,
we have 3 to 4 technical experts hired by the DGA who will be available there to help you post-award, during the hackathons and post-award, to help you build a story around the technology that you're developing. So I would not worry too much about the historical, about finding an expert to help you with the historical component. We will have these experts on hand to meet with you and to help you develop the historical component. That does not mean we can throw all the work on them. They're there as consultants. You will have to do the work, but they're there to help you develop the ideas and the stories to make sure that the historical accuracy is correct and to help you with the imagination. So and those experts know very well about the 3 sites that I mentioned.
Okay, I'll take the easy questions, then I'll move the issue. There's still a couple of follow-up questions on the IP. I'll discuss first the non-IP issues. Can the game played on site, like the arrow shooter game, be a VR game where users come and use on-site VR to play the game? Yes, sure. But again, you need to think about the survivability of the game. If there's expensive hardware being loaned out, who would give them the device? How would they use it? Do they bring their own? So there's these challenges that Samir touched on that you need to keep in mind. Is it required to be on mobile? No, not at all. No restrictions. Doesn't have to be on mobile. Can the game be created for another location of the Country Heritage theme other than the 3 ones specified? Hussein, no, it has to be relevant to these 3 sites. It can include others, but it has to be relevant to those also. So it could be one that could be, for example, linking the sea castle in Saida to the land one. That would be fantastic. But we cannot have it just for the land and not have the sea one. How about bigger sites? How applicable is this technique? Haneen, bigger sites, you mean historical sites, is up to you. What you do and how much space you're using in that site, clearly up to the DGA's approval, because they're the ones that are custodians of these sites. So the Director General of Antiquities is part of the government. Samir, thank you for clarifying that. I see that is part of the government, and they're the custodians of all these sites in Lebanon. So we coordinate with them very, very closely. If we use Unity, it should not have a splash screen for licensing. I think Layal is asking. Yeah, preferably not. So we'll talk about that as part of the budget. Would a spin-off of an already existing idea game that is currently in development fit the criteria? For context, we're already working on an indie game, and we thought we'd make a spin-off of that same game where it's about those sites will maintain the gameplay of the original game. Yes, Lee, for sure, you could do that. And again, but that brings you back to the question of IP. Okay, so then we'll talk. I'll come back to the issue of IP. I don't want to brush that away. Okay, can we get the file within the meeting details? Yes, sure, Ghassan, we will post that about the meeting and the presentation. So again, about the IP, and Liane is our, I see, is Liane still with us? Let me check the list. Liane, Dan, I think we need
I'm here.
MJ, yeah, we need a stronger answer and more clear answer on the IP. So let me explain to you what I understand the issue of the IP is, guys, so we're clear, because there's a question also here about whether we get a cutoff of the revenues or so beyond the IP, or we get any equity if somebody has a startup? And my short answer is no. If you have a startup or a company, we have nothing to do with it. We have nothing to do with the revenue. What we're talking about here is the component that was delivered out of the 15,000 or the 10,000 euros. We want to make sure that that component can be used for free in these sites indefinitely. And if you've used part of your existing technology, this comes back to the question about an existing game. If you used your game that is existing and you've developed it further for these sites, you've customized it, that is fine. We want to be able to use it for free indefinitely, but we will not share profit with your game that is being played somewhere else. And we do not want equity in any way in your company or in your startup, whether it is existing or existed after the funding came about. But what we want to make sure is that the technology and the game that was developed there, you would allow us to use it on that site indefinitely, and in a way to, that's what I understand it from my understanding.
You got it, that's correct.
Right, so it's a licensing. It's an indefinite licensing limited to the sites, and you keep the ownership in a way. Right, Dan?
Yes, that's it.
I hope that clarifies and that, you know, reduce the concern about that, because I know there's always a concern from startup about that issue.
Yeah, the issue is that, I mean, MEDGAIMS is a consortium of partners working. We're not here to make money out of this thing. We want to make sure that the games that are being developed for the 3 sites can be played after the grant is over. So that's why we're getting into this IP issue. We don't want the games that are developed by yourselves at a certain point to say the IP is ours and you have to pay us to be able to play them. There has to be sustainability in the project, and it's not just us, it's the European Union would not accept that. Now, when you move to other games, we have nothing to do with you. You can do whatever you like, even if the games are similar. Actually, one of the objectives of this grant is not only to, I would say the primary objective is not creating games for these 3 sites. The primary objective is creating businesses. So we want you to create businesses. We want you to have the IP for these games, and we want you to succeed. The objective is to create businesses, first of all, and then but creating the businesses in cultural heritage and in gamification. That's the whole process, and that's the whole logic behind this grant, is really to use gamification, gamified experiences at cultural heritage site in this novel manner to start creating businesses. And it's the long-term objective is for these MSMEs to be created, and for the tourism industry, different than the sun and sea, you know, people coming to the Bahar, to the sea and all that. We are trying to build beyond that and create a new tourism sector that's built around tourist experiences that don't require that. So it is you guys that are really, we're aiming for you guys to succeed. We want you to succeed. But at the same time, we want to still be able to play these games once it's finished, so we can maintain that, that really is an advertisement for us for these type of businesses. Okay? So by all means, if we could give you the IP today and say that all the IP is yours, we don't care. We would, but we have to protect ourselves at the same time and protect future industries and future businesses who want to create similar businesses as you do. Okay, that's so you understand it.
So actually, it's our benefit if you take this and develop it and grow it further, and you have a sustainable business model, because then it's to your advantage also to sustain this game in our site. And therefore, it's part of the sustainability plan, is that we're hoping that whether you're an established startup or a company established or will be established, is that you will actually succeed from this seed money to allow you to get into this industry and open this door for you to maybe have other creative ideas somewhere else, and be able to grow it. And while you're doing that, maintain the game that is in our sites, because you will have a sense of ownership for it. It's in your name. And this way we could make sure that this doesn't end in the 2-3 years duration of this project. Okay, another question from Iyad is, if a game were to get the grant, what would be the process of developing the game be like? Do we continue on our own? How involved would guys be after the Hackathon Creative Labs? Iyad, we support you with whatever you need post the hackathons and the creative labs, access to the DGA, to their experts. If you have any technical questions that we could support you with, any expertise we might have to offer you or equipment, we would offer that. But the development and the effort is on you. So it's going to be yours, and you're going to be accountable. There's going to be a phased out payment plan that is dependent on the deliverables. So, but we want you, again, like as Dan said, we want you to succeed. So we'll help you with anything we can.
Please make sure to read the terms of reference, because they have a lot of answers to the questions that you have. Please don't forget in your submissions to include, if you want to borrow equipment, what's the equipment that you want to borrow. We've already ordered some VR and AR equipment. If some of you decide to use that, and those will be on a lend basis to you guys. Okay, so please make sure to read the terms of reference. There's a lot of information there that will help answer your questions.
Yeah, Dana Leo has a good suggestion in the chat. Please, if we can add it to our FAQs online.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Any other questions? Can we ask, if you don't mind, who would, as of now, would be considering submitting an idea? From those present, who would be? Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay. Great. Fantastic. So put up your teams. If you don't have a team, if you don't have a startup already, think about partnering with people who might help you on the creative component. And please check out this link. The details are there. I know they're very detailed, the instructions. They're very legal because there's many organizations and the EU is involved in this. So this is a very formal funding process. But please go through it. And if you have any questions, send us an email there, and hopefully we can help you quickly about it.
I'd like to add one more thing, Imad, if I may.
Please.
That the hackathons and the creative labs, you're eligible to submit to any of the 4 countries. Now, with the restrictions, the way they are, the travel restriction difficulties, it might be difficult for you to travel to Italy, Spain, or Jordan, but you're eligible to submit to any of the 4 countries. So if you decide to submit to Lebanon and Jordan, and Italy and Spain, you're welcome to do that, because the competition will be a lot more fierce abroad versus what you have here. Okay, and another follow-up with regards to the hackathons, we're hoping to have them the end of the month as the original plan on a physical basis. Now, if that doesn't work, then we'll have to move it to a virtual, the way I might told you at the beginning of the lecture, for those who want to.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Eli, we didn't hear your voice. Can you add something?
Okay. Hello all. I think you summed it up pretty good, and I think this is a great opportunity to try out your development skills at Games. We want to create jobs and have more tourism, and we want to build this ecosystem of gamification. And we want to identify and empower developers and creators like you guys. So we're happy with attendance, and we're here to support you. We have built a nice infrastructure in terms of collaborators and equipment and sites. So we're trying to simplify and make your life easier. So please take this opportunity and help us be creative and bring more tourists to Lebanon. So everything will be posted on our website you see up there. If you have any questions also, please email us at info@medgaims.com, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.
And Eli also, on top of everything he does, he's responsible for the communication for the team. So he'll kill me if I don't remind you to please follow us on the social media and like us and all whatever you guys do on social media. I'm not sure what you do, but do your thing. So if there are no further questions, we'll stop here. I'll wait a second to see if anything comes up in the chat or anybody wants to add anything. And if not, you're most welcome, George. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for taking the time and considering this. We hope we could partner with some of you very, very soon and work on some exciting, fun projects. Thank you very much.
Can I just before you finish, I forgot just one more thing. There's another webinar next week, but that's for the non-techies. So we'll probably have, we will have stakeholders who are other municipalities, people responsible for tourist sites and things like that. But if you would like to attend, you're welcome to attend. Same time next week. That'll be hosted by, mostly speakers will be technical experts on the sites, people who know a lot about the 3 different sites. I'll be starting that off and then handing it over to the DGA. So you're welcome to attend that one as well, if you like.
Dana, can you please send the link in the chat to the registration of that webinar? Sure, to all the registered. Okay, but maybe if you have it quick here, people can do it before they forget, if you have easy access. Okay, thanks, Dana. So she'll post it in the chat in a second. And thank you, everyone. And hopefully we'll make the presentation available on the website. Our website has resources section in it, and it has videos. Hopefully we could post it there. Thank you all again. Danny, any last comment?
Good, thank you, Ahmad.
Thank you all. Have a nice weekend. And we'll wait for Dana a second to hopefully pull out the registration link.
All right.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dana. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lian, and have a nice weekend, everybody. Take care.